Hello, I'm Eric Peterson. I was born December 19th, 1990. This time period was a period of great change in the world. The Soviet Union was still around, a point which definitely makes me feel quite aged. But it was on its last legs, and several of the events that happened in December of 1990 reflect this. However, despite the massive change that occurred during this month, quite a few things actually stayed the same. The top Billboard chart during most of December of 1990 was Because I Love You by Stevie B. I've actually never heard of either the song or this artist. My wife, who's a lot more musically inclined, had never actually heard of this song either, which definitely raises a bit of a question in my mind. The top movies during the month were The Godfather Part 3, which I felt was the worst of the Godfather trilogy, Edward Scissorhands, which is actually my favorite Johnny Depp movie. I really appreciated the artistic elements and the plot, and Kindergarten Cop, which starred the future governor of California, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Additionally, the top movie during my birthday was Home Alone, the original. During this time, the Persian Gulf crisis was starting to rear its ugly head. Although Iraq and the U.S. weren't officially at war, Iraq had taken possession of Kuwait, and the U.S. and the Soviet Union were both largely protesting this measure. As a result, tensions rose in the Persian Gulf, and gas prices rose to a whopping $1.60. I mentioned earlier that the Soviet Union was on its way out. A prime example of this was East and West Germany had been reunified in the late 1890s. Late 1980s. The Berlin Wall had come down during this time, and in December of 1990, both the East and West, now Germany, had its first unified parliamentary elections since 1933. You might wonder why there was a gap between the 1930s and the Soviet influence on Germany, but Hitler, who came to power during that election cycle, stifled elections during his time in power. Another indication was Poland had its first democratically elected president with free elections. They had had several presidents elected prior, but none of the elections were really all that above board. The president, I'm going to butcher this, but Lech Walesa was his name. He was famous in Poland for founding the Solidarity movement, which galvanized the unions against the Soviets. His slogan was, "I don't want to, but I'll have to." The governor of Michigan at the time was James Blanchard. He was a Democrat who had just lost an election to John Engler the month prior. Blanchard served 2 terms as Michigan governor and would actually run again in the early 2000s, ultimately losing the nomination to Jennifer Granholm. The president at the time was George H.W. Bush, who was previously the vice president to Ronald Reagan and would only serve 1 term, losing to Bill Clinton in 1992. His son, of course, would be elected in 2000. And, most important of all, on December 24th, Tom Cruise married Nicole Kidman. They divorced in 2001. And proving that some things never change, the Lions were wrapping up a 6-10 season. Although the time of my birth was a very chaotic time for the world, the Soviet Union's ending sent shockwaves throughout much of Europe and the rest of the world. It was also a time of rejuvenation. A lot of democracies which had previously laid dormant were being thrust back into the spotlight. And politics in the U.S. was unfortunately much the same. I hope you enjoyed this presentation and look forward to doing another presentation in a couple of days.